we turn to Rabbi Avi Friedman. He is Rabbi of Congregation Or Shalom, also known as the Jewish Community Center in Summit. Rabbi Friedman served 4 years as president of the Summit Interfaith Council. He's a native of Detroit, graduated from the University of Michigan, and was ordained by the Jewish Theological Seminary of America in New York City. So thank you, Avi.
Thank you for a lovely introduction. Well, good evening, everyone, and thank you to Susan for making this happen and Central Presbyterian for hosting us. The first thing that struck me when I first heard about the encyclical, before I even read a word of it, was that this encyclical came out 50 years after Nostra Aetate. And for those of you who are not familiar with Nostra Aetate, that is a papal teaching from 1965, issued by Pope Paul and ratified by the bishops of the Second Vatican Council, in which the groundwork for interfaith dialogue was laid down by the Church. And the Catholic Church really became leaders in interfaith dialogue. It didn't really exist before then. Relations among different faiths were really tepid at best. And here we are 50 years later, able to have this kind of conversation among different faiths because of that precedent set 50 years ago. So we can only hope that this encyclical has the same sort of effect, with the Pope once again serving as a world leader, causing people of different faiths to come together with a single purpose. So that was the first thing that struck me about this wonderful text that Pope Francis has given us. The second thing that struck me was from the very beginning, where Pope Francis talks about the earth as our sister. And it immediately took me to the very first story of siblings in the Bible, Cain and Abel. And we know that Cain asked that very famous question about siblings in Hebrew, Hashomer Achi Anochi, am I my brother's keeper? And while that question is never explicitly answered in the Bible, it is quite clear that the answer is yes. So those were my first thoughts when I saw this beautiful document. So now, as directed, I'm going to turn ahead to chapters 3 and 4. One phrase that just sort of leaped off the page at me anyway was this, and I'll quote Pope Francis directly. It has become countercultural to choose a lifestyle whose goals are even partly independent of technology, of its costs, and its power to globalize and make us all the same. And this was, to me, a very powerful statement. And this may be an area where, as people of different faiths, we approach things a little bit differently. Because in the Jewish faith, the way that we have preserved the Sabbath gives us an opportunity to do exactly that which the Pope says is impossible or countercultural. And I think that that's ultimately the challenge that the Pope is throwing down. We have to be countercultural, and we have to be leaders in that countercultural revolution. And so I want to turn to some words from a great Jewish thinker, Abraham Joshua Heschel, who was involved in the Second Vatican Council and was involved in the crafting of Nostra Aetate and the relationship that came between the Catholic Church and Judaism and the Jewish community as a result of it. So one thing that Dr. Heschel points out is the very first thing which is declared holy, the Hebrew word is kadosh, in the Bible. The Sabbath. The very first thing declared holy is the Sabbath. Here's what Heschel writes about the Sabbath. The meaning of the Sabbath is to celebrate time rather than space. 6 days a week, we live under the tyranny of things of space. On the Sabbath, we try to become attuned to the holiness in time. And much to my children's chagrin, one of the ways that we do this is by turning off our electronic devices. For 25 hours, a traditional Jew disconnects. No TV, no internet, no phone, and really disengages from the technology that the Pope is talking about. And this allows us, A, to appreciate time. Time is very different when you're not pulling your phone out of your pocket and checking for that next email or that news update. And you appreciate the people in your life. You appreciate the beauty of the earth and all that nature has to offer. And so we all manage time differently, but here I think that's one thing that Judaism gets right, and I would encourage all of you to try it as a means of being a part of this countercultural revolution that the Pope is inviting us all to be a part of. So that's one response that I had. A second is the crisis and effects of modern anthropocentrism. I can't pronounce it either, Susan. I think that's why he wrote it and didn't speak it, right? No question that we human beings put ourselves at the center of the universe, and many of our religious narratives do the same. So rather than completely rejecting it, the question is, what responsibility comes with being in the center, being the crown of creation? If we turn to Genesis chapter 1, verse 28, we hear God's command to Adam, the first human being, replenish the earth and subdue it, and have dominion over the fish of the sea and the fowl in the air, and over the cattle, and over all the earth. That's pretty clear, right? The Bible is telling us we're in control. But with that comes responsibility. And the rabbinic tradition understood this from a very early point. In the very early period of rabbinic Judaism, there emerged a literature called midrash. The literal translation of that is exegesis, adding a layer of meaning that's not necessarily there in context. And so one of the midrashim, that's the plural, based on this interaction, describes a further conversation between God and Adam. And so after giving Adam dominion over all the earth, this is what God said. I made my beautiful world for your sake. Take care not to hurt or destroy it, for if you do, there is no one to fix it after you. That's a 2,000-year-old text, and we would do well to remember it today. I want to close with just one more teaching from the Jewish tradition. So in chapter 4, when Pope Francis starts talking about integral ecology, that's perhaps not something that the rabbis would have phrased in that way some 2,000 years ago or 1,500 years ago, or maybe even not last week. But we have a saying in rabbinic Judaism that was originally about our Jewish community, but I think it can be extrapolated to any group of people that considers themselves a community. So in Hebrew, it is Kol Yisrael Arevim Ze Bazeh. All of Israel, referring to all Jews, are connected, are webbed, one to the other, or one with the other. So when we talk about a web of life or a circle of life, the interconnectedness of all living creatures, it starts in a community. It has to start with the people with whom you're closest. So whether that be your individual faith community or our summit community, and then slowly expand outward. And if we remember that we are all connected, then there's a chance that we'll start making some better decisions. Thank you for your time this evening.